Hey again, it's Jason from Fraser Valley Rose Farm, and I'm a big fan of putting a thick mulch of wood chips in the garden. The primary reason, of course, is to suppress weeds, but I also get the great benefits of maintaining a consistent soil temperature, moisture, even without additional watering, and improving the condition of the soil with organic matter and nutrients over time. But there are some circumstances and reasons why you might consider not using wood chips, or at least using them in a different way. So let me talk about those concerns that people have with using wood chips in their garden in this video. Gardeners aren't the only ones who love wood chips. Think of the insects that eat wood chips directly, things like carpenter ants and termites. But even because of the condition that they create in the ground, that cool, moist layer allows for shelter for such things as snails and slugs, other small insects or soft-bodied insects like earwigs and sowbugs, or even things like snakes. So you got to be a little cautious about the fact that you're creating a favorable environment in that area. And certainly the most important of these are those first ones, the wood-eating insects. If you're in an area that has termite damage or carpenter ant damage, you will want to place your wood chips suitably far away from outbuildings or your house so that you don't attract that activity right up to the foundations of your house. The second disadvantage I'll talk about, and it's the one I hear most frequently, is the idea that mulch like this, when it's exposed to the very top layer of your soil, it will borrow nitrogen as it begins to break down, which is a true thing, but I'm not sure whether to call it an advantage or a disadvantage, and hear me out on this one, because oftentimes I'm placing this down as a weed control layer. As a weed control layer, I don't want those surface weed annuals to get the upper hand or to grow any faster than I want to. I'm putting down the mulch to suppress their germination. I'm also putting it down so that it can rob that nitrogen from the top layer of soil, or borrow it rather, and keep those annual weeds from getting large fast. So it actually suppresses weeds in a couple of different ways. As for my perennials, my shrubs, anything deeper rooted, it doesn't seem to have that problem, and it's just something you have to keep in mind. Certainly I would not use this to mulch my annual lettuce patch, very shallow rooted, unless I intended to add nitrogen at the same time. Nitrogen is one of these things that is widely deficient in soil, or low in soil, so it's always a limiting factor. So you're always of a mind, do I add some nitrogen to boost the plant growth? If you're adding wood chips at the same time, you may have to add a little bit more to counteract it, or you skip it in those areas where you have shallow rooted annual plants. Let's discuss a third concern, which is the acidification of soil. And somewhere in the washed out background of this scene, you're going to see fields full of blueberries, and traditionally they do use wood chips or sawdust more often as a mulch around the base of their blueberries to acidify the soil, or help keep the conditions the way that the blueberries, which are fairly shallow rooted, enjoy it. One thing I will say about this, because we are in an acid soil area, is that I don't concern myself with it too much, because much like the nitrogen thing, it acidifies short term in the top layers, and then it tends to neutralize as it breaks down into the soil. So unless I'm really worried about the acid levels of the plants that have shallow roots, I don't tend to think about the acidification. There are things you can do to counteract acidification, including lime and other calcium applications, but in general it's not something I worry too much about. Let's talk about that temperature moderating effect of having a thick mulch of wood on your soil. It keeps the soil temperature and moisture more consistent. Well, if you're dealing with cold temperatures at winter, or you're dealing with hot temperatures in summer, I would generally say that moderating that soil temperature is a good thing. But if you're talking about just at the end of winter coming into spring, the soil is cool, and what you want is warm soil in general to kickstart your shrubs and perennials and annuals. So having that moderating effect on top of a cold soil actually will slow things down. So I would advise you just be aware of that, and it might make sense at that point to pull the mulch away for some time and run with bare soil until it warms up, and then you can of course replace the mulch as you get further into the summer season. And while we're talking about mulch in the winter, let me also just say this, although it may go without saying, is that if you build a volcano up against the trunk of your trees or your shrubs and push a whole bunch of mulch against it, it can trap moisture against the wood and help it to rot. And of course, I mentioned about rodents and that crawling in and finding shelter in there. So in general, I like to leave the crown of my plant without mulch piled right up against it. One final concern that I hear sometimes, but I don't think there's a ton of validity to, is the idea that it brings mold or mildew or rot organisms down to that layer of the garden. Sometimes hear this from the rose people in Europe who say, don't mulch your roses. Actually, I think people have come around to the idea that having fungally dominated compost or having fungus in the garden, I mean, it's just another decay organism, may sometimes look a little unattractive, but it really does not correlate to plant pathogens in any serious way, again, unless you're mounding up the mulch against the stems of your trees or shrubs. So I don't think it's a major concern. I think, in fact, it's a net benefit. And all of that, I will say, is overall, if you're in an area where you can get inexpensive wood mulch like mine, and I get that for free from Chip Drop in the fall and winter here is an easy time for me to get it and to lay it down. So I think overall the pros far outweigh the cons. It's just you have to know those few issues. All right, if you want to leave any questions down in the comments below the video, I'll see what I can do to help, and thanks so much for watching.